Have you ever wondered how the Star Wars galaxy would have changed if Kit Fisto had survived Order 66? In this Star Wars What If Theory video, we explore how the galaxy would have changed if some of the major events of the universe were altered. What if Qui-Gon Jinn and Rael Aveross had left the Jedi Order to form their own faction alongside Count Dooku? How about if Plo Koon had used Force judgement on Darth Vader? And what about if General Rahm Kota had trained Ezra Bridger? In this video, we answer all these questions and more as we ponder, what if? What if Qui-Gon Jinn and Rael Aveross had joined Count Dooku and formed their own Jedi Order? Count Dooku stood on the balcony of his estate on Serenno, the twin moons casting a cold glow across the landscape. The galaxy he had once sworn to protect under the Jedi Order had lost its way. The Senate was bloated with corruption. The Jedi were nothing more than enforcers for politicians, and the will of the Force was being ignored in favour of politics and dogma. Dooku had spent years trying to convince the Jedi High Council to open their eyes. He had warned them that they'd become pawns to a failing republic, that their service to the Senate blinded them to the Force's true will. But they refused to listen, so he left. He would not fade into obscurity, nor allow himself to become a recluse. He would act. His first act as a free Jedi was to contact two men he trusted above all others, Qui-Gon Jinn and Rael Aveross. Dooku's transmission reached them both, each receiving the same message. The Jedi have abandoned their purpose. The Republic is dying. But the Force speaks to us still. Join me, and together we will forge a new path. Qui-Gon Jinn sat in meditation when the call reached him. It had been nearly a year since his battle on Naboo, a battle he had survived. His duel with Maul had ended, not with a mortal wound, but with a final, decisive strike. He had been wounded, yes, but he had defeated the Sith warrior, ensuring the Republic's safety, at least for a time. Yet despite his victory, he had seen the cracks in the Jedi. When he presented Anakin Skywalker to the Council, expecting them to finally accept the truth of the Force's will, they still had hesitated. They had only allowed Anakin to be trained because of Qui-Gon's unwavering stance. But even then, he felt their resistance, their fear of change. When he received Dooku's message, he knew his old master spoke the truth. He responded simply, "I will join you, Master. It is time for the Jedi to follow the Force once more." And with that, Qui-Gon left Coruscant, taking Anakin Skywalker with him. Rael Aveross had never been one for rules. He had always been the outlier, the renegade, the one who questioned authority at every turn. When he lost his Padawan, Nimpiana, he had been consumed by guilt, but instead of giving in to despair, he rebuilt himself, determined to serve the Force in his own way. When Dooku's message arrived, he was sitting in a cantina on Ryosa, a drink in one hand and a winning sabacc hand in the other. He read the message, frowned, then read it again. He finished his drink, stood up, and said, "Well, hell, guess I'm starting a revolution." With that, he left everything behind and set course for Serenno. Dooku, Qui-Gon, and Rael gathered on Serenno, standing in the great halls of Dooku's ancestral home. Together, they laid out their vision. The Jedi will no longer serve politicians, they will serve only the Force. No more outdated dogma. They would forge a new order, one that listened to the Force's will and acted accordingly. And so, the true Jedi Order was born. Jedi from across the galaxy, those who had grown tired of the Republic's corruption, began to hear whispers of this new path. Some dismissed it as treason, others listened, and those who listened began to leave the Jedi Temple. As more Jedi left to join Dooku's cause, entire star systems began to take notice. The Jedi were icons, symbols of justice, and now many of them were turning their backs on the Republic. Led by Dooku and Qui-Gon, the Separatist movement was not born out of war, but out of necessity. It became a peacekeeping force, one that acted where the Republic refused to. They brokered peace between feuding planets, prevented corporate exploitation, and protected the helpless in ways the Republic no longer would. Among their ranks were Anakin Skywalker, Qui-Gon's loyal student, who had grown under both his master and Dooku's teachings, learning how to truly listen to the Force. Luminara Unduli and Barriss Offee, both seeing the wisdom in the New Order. Quinlan Vos, drawn by the promise of true independence from Council dogma. Shaak Ti and a handful of other Jedi Masters who saw cracks forming in the Republic. They were not traitors, they were reformers, and they were growing stronger. Sidious had watched patiently as the Jedi split into factions. With no war, the Senate had not granted him emergency powers. He had no control over the military, so he made his own. In secret, he had bred a private army, clones from Kamino, battle droids from Geonosis, and a new apprentice, one trained in pure, relentless hatred. Then, on a single night, he unleashed them all upon Coruscant. The Jedi Temple will burn. The attack came without warning. Late at night, as the stars shone over Coruscant's skyline, the Jedi Temple was suddenly bathed in fire. From the depths of the Undercity, legions of battle droids, once thought decommissioned, emerged from hidden bunkers, marching towards the temple in endless waves. Simultaneously, clone shock troopers, programmed not by the Republic, but by Palpatine himself, descended in dropships, opening fire on Jedi and Temple guards alike. At the head of the assault stood General Grievous, his cybernetic body gleaming in firelight. His mechanical fingers flexed over the hilts of 4 stolen Jedi lightsabers, trophies of his past kills. But even more terrifying was the figure beside him, Palpatine's new apprentice, a dark warrior clad in black armor, a helmet concealing his face, wielding a lightsaber as red as fresh blood. The Jedi fought valiantly, but they were overwhelmed. The Council had no time to react. Mace Windu led a counterattack, but it was already too late. The temple was collapsing, its archives burning, its younglings slaughtered. By morning, Coruscant belonged to the Sith. From the wreckage of the temple, a handful of Jedi escaped into the underworld of Coruscant, fleeing the Sith's trap. Yoda, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, and the remaining surviving Jedi gathered above Bail Organa's ship, seeking refuge. But there was only one place left for them to turn: Dooku. The true Jedi Order, which had once been scorned and labelled traitorous by some among the Republic, was now the Jedi's only hope. And so, swallowing their pride, the Jedi Masters set a course for Serenno. When Yoda, Windu, and the remnants of the Order arrived on Serenno, they expected hostility. Instead, they were welcomed with open arms. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first to greet them, his face calm but his heart heavy with sadness. "The Republic is dead," he said simply. Dooku sat upon his throne, listening as the Council recounted the Sith's coup, the fall of Coruscant, and Palpatine's new empire. Then he stood. "Then we do what we should have done long ago," he said. "We take it back." From across the galaxy, Jedi and warriors flocked to Serenno. The true Jedi had always worked with local planetary militias, and now these forces answered the call. The Separatists, who had never been an enemy to the Republic, but merely an alternative, now stood as its only defenders. Among their forces were Mandalorian warriors, led by Bo-Katan Kryze, who was fearful of what the Empire would do to Mandalore under Imperial rule. Wookiee warriors from Kashyyyk, led by Tarful, Nautolan, Twi'lek, and Mon Calamari freedom fighters from the Outer Rim. This was no longer just a Jedi fight. This was a war for the soul of the galaxy. The first battle took place over Alderaan. Palpatine had begun consolidating his hold over the core worlds, deploying his clone legions and droid forces to solidify Imperial control. The true Jedi Order launched a massive counter-offensive. Anakin Skywalker, now fully realized in the Force, led an assault on an Imperial stronghold, cutting through squads of clone troopers with a precision that even his enemies had to admire. Beside him, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Rael Aveross led their own forces, carving a path through the defences. By the end of the battle, Alderaan was free. The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Empire was not unstoppable. The true Jedi were fighting back. The Emperor had allowed his enemies to believe they were winning. He had baited them into open war. Now he struck back. He sent his greatest weapon to crush the rebellion, Darth Vader. One by one, the Jedi fell. Rahm Kota, the battle-hardened warrior, fought Vader on the ruined cityscape of Brental 4. He held his own, but in the end, Reeser ran through him with a single devastating strike. Quinlan Vos met his end on Nar Shaddaa, ambushed by an army of purge troopers. He took down a dozen of them before Reeser snapped his neck with the Force. Mace Windu led a strike team to liberate Coruscant, but Reeser awaited him. Their duel was legendary. In the end, Windu was overpowered, his body cast from the Senate balcony into the depths below. Plo Koon, Luminara Unduli, Shaak Ti, they all fell in battle. The Jedi were losing. With the Jedi now fully aligned under Dooku's new Jedi Order, the war reached a turning point. Palpatine had failed to crush them, and the separatist turned rebels had grown stronger. The Empire launched a major offensive on Corellia, a key industrial world that the Jedi had freed from Imperial control. Reeser led the assault personally. Alongside him were General Grievous, the cybernetic monster, the Inquisitors, Sith-trained warriors, former Jedi, now hunting down their own, and the 501st Legion, Palpatine's most elite clone force, deployed to exterminate the Jedi once and for all. Dooku and Rael Aveross prepared their counterattack. Rael had always been a maverick, a Jedi who had lived by his own code. He wasn't polished like Qui-Gon or regal like Dooku. He was rough around the edges, a man who'd seen war and knew how to fight dirty. As the Imperial forces landed on Corellia, it was Rael who led the first strike. Armed with two curved hilt lightsabers, he tore through clone squadrons with feral aggression. His Mandalorian allies, led by Bo-Katan Kryze, launched aerial assaults from jetpacks, cutting down troopers from above. Wookiee warriors, their massive frames wrapped in Corellian battle armour, tore through Grievous's droid legions. While Dooku and Qui-Gon held the battle line, Rael was in the thick of it, slicing through the enemy with a wild grin. Then, Reeser arrived. The battlefield shook as the Sith assassin descended into the field. Reeser was a storm of black armour and red fury, cutting through Jedi and soldiers alike. Rael locked eyes with him across the battlefield. "You got that whole dark and brooding thing down, kid," Rael muttered, spinning his sabers, "but let's see if you can keep up." The fight was brutal. Reeser fought with raw power, his every strike threatening to crush Rael's bones. Rael fought with speed and unpredictability, darting around like a Corellian street brawler. The two warriors clashed across the wreckage of a downed Republic cruiser, their lightsabers igniting the darkness. Rael was fast, but Reeser was stronger. It took everything Rael had just to survive. Then, at the crucial moment, a Jedi gunship swooped in, blasting Reeser back with heavy laser fire. "Time to go," Qui-Gon called from the cockpit. Rael leapt onto the ship as it ascended, staring down at Reeser as the Sith assassin vanished into the flames below. The battle was won. The Jedi's victory on Corellia was a turning point. With their forces rallied, the Jedi launched their final offensive, taking back Coruscant. Dooku, Qui-Gon, Rael Aveross, and Anakin led the charge. Anakin Skywalker led the vanguard with the Mandalorians. Rael Aveross and his Jedi warriors infiltrated the Imperial Citadel, taking down Palpatine's officers. Qui-Gon Jinn led the defensive, ensuring no reinforcements could arrive. Dooku faced General Grievous one last time. Grievous had been twisted further by Sith alchemy, his body now more machine than warrior. But Dooku knew every move the general would make. With precision and mastery, Dooku outdueled him, severing his cybernetic limbs one by one. With a final strike of his blade, he ended the general for good. The halls of the Imperial Palace were silent. The air itself was heavy with darkness, the shadows pulsing with unseen horrors. At the end of it all, seated upon a throne of black stone, was Darth Sidious. He had foreseen this moment, and he welcomed it. Before him stood 4 of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. Dooku, his old apprentice, returned to defy him. Qui-Gon Jinn, a man who should have been wiped out as a threat in the very beginning. Rael Aveross, the rogue, the wildcard, unpredictable and therefore dangerous. Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, the one who was meant to be the heir of the Sith. Sidious smiled, his yellow teeth gleaming in the dim light. So, this is how the Jedi die, he whispered. Then lightning erupted from his fingertips. The throne room exploded into chaos. The Jedi scattered, barely avoiding the storm of Sith lightning as the room trembled under Sidious's fury. Dooku was the first to strike. His blade ignited in a flash of deep blue, his movements precise and flawless. He attacked like a fencer, each stroke meant to pierce the Sith Lord's defences, but Sidious was faster. Qui-Gon followed next. His green sabre burned brightly, spinning wide in controlled arcs. His stance was unshakable, his connection to the Force pure. He fought with unwavering purpose, every strike meant to protect, not destroy. Sidious laughed, his yellow eyes gleaming with amusement. Still so blind, he hissed, his blade clashing against theirs with terrifying strength. While Dooku and Qui-Gon held the line, Rael Aveross moved like a storm. He flipped over Palpatine, bringing both sabres down in a wild cross strike. Sidious sidestepped him with inhuman speed, his cloak whipping in the air. Rael grinned. "Oh, you're fast, old man," he muttered, "but so am I." He lunged again, his blades a blur. He fought dirty, using punches, kicks, and unpredictable feints. He struck low, high, then low again, forcing Sidious to constantly adjust. For a moment, he was winning. Then, Sidious twisted his grip and stabbed his lightsaber straight through Rael's ribs. The rogue Jedi froze, his eyes going wide. Sidious leaned in close, whispering. Your defiance was amusing. Then he twisted the blade. Rael coughed, blood dripping from his lips. But instead of fear, he laughed. Yeah, well, I always did like a good fight. With one last surge of strength, he grabbed onto Sidious, holding the Sith Lord in place. Anakin, now! He roared. Then, the light left his eyes. Anakin felt the scream before he heard it. It came from deep inside him, a howl of fury, grief, and power. His vision blurred, his senses narrowing. Sidious had killed Rael. Something had snapped inside of him. With one outstretched hand, Anakin reached into the Force and crushed the Sith Lord's body with pure power. Sidious gasped, his entire form seized by an invisible grip. Anakin lifted him into the air, his eyes blazing with gold and blue fire. The Force screamed around him, rippling in waves that shattered the walls. Tears streamed down Anakin's face. "This ends now," he whispered. Then he tightened his grip. Sidious let out a strangled cry, his bones creaking under the weight of Anakin's wrath. A voice cut through the storm. "Anakin." Anakin froze. He turned to see Qui-Gon Jinn, standing firm, his eyes filled with deep sorrow. "This is not the way," Qui-Gon said softly. Anakin trembled, his body still surging with power. "He killed Rael," he said. "I know," Qui-Gon said, stepping forward. "But if you kill him this way, you will become him." Anakin's grip loosened. His tears fell more freely now, his breath shaking. Then, with a shuddering sigh, he let Sidious go. The Sith Lord collapsed to the floor, gasping. For the first time, he looked afraid. Sidious snarled, his strength returning. "You think this is over?" He unleashed another wave of lightning, but Dooku and Qui-Gon struck together. Dooku's blade moved with flawless precision, his years of training culminating in this final battle. Qui-Gon fought with righteous fury, every strike aimed at forcing Sidious back. The Sith Lord was losing ground, but it wasn't enough. A door exploded inward. A small figure entered the throne room. Yoda. His presence filled the chamber, his green blade igniting with a snap hiss. Sidious's eyes went wide. Impossible. The ancient Jedi Master moved like a blur, flipping into the fray. Dooku struck high, Qui-Gon struck low, but it was Yoda who struck the final blow. Sidious screamed as Yoda's saber plunged into his chest. With a final breath, the Sith Lord fell. Darth Sidious, the Emperor, was no more. The galaxy was free. The Jedi had won. Rael's body was laid to rest, honoured as the true warrior that he was. Anakin stood beside Qui-Gon, no longer weighed by his destiny. Dooku, at long last, felt peace, and Yoda, the last of the old Jedi, looked to the horizon. "Balanced, once more, the Force is," he whispered. And so, the galaxy's next chapter began. What if Aayla Secura had survived Order 66? Aayla Secura had always trusted her men. The 327 Star Corps were her brothers, her allies. Commander Bly had been at her side through countless battles. And yet, the moment the clones received the order, something changed. She felt it before it happened. A shift in the Force, a terrible wrongness. Then, Bly raised his blaster. His hands shook as he tried to fight the commands in his head. General, he stammered. The clones hesitated too. Their respect and loyalty to Aayla fought against the unnatural programming forcing them to kill her. For a brief second, she saw the war in Bly's eyes. A war he was losing. Then he pulled the trigger. Aayla moved. She flipped backward, dodging the first volley. Her lightsaber snapped to life, deflecting 2 bolts. The jungle erupted in chaos. Her men screamed in agony as they tried to resist the order, some even turning their weapons on each other rather than shoot at her. Bly, his hands shaking, barked out, "Run!" Aayla hesitated. Then, with a final look at her men, she vanished into the jungle. For years, Aayla lived as a ghost. She never used the Force. She changed names, faces, identities. Each time she settled on a planet, she found herself looking over her shoulder, waiting for the Empire to find her. She lived in the shadows, in cantinas, in backwater towns. She was no longer Aayla Secura, Jedi Knight. She was just a survivor. But when she heard Rylot's rebellion, everything changed. Her homeworld was suffering, her people were enslaved, and Cham Syndulla was leading a fight that needed her. For the first time in years, Aayla stopped running. She went home. The rebellion had fought hard, but the Imperials were too strong, with overwhelming numbers. Their last hope was the capital city of Lesu. Cham Syndulla had gathered his forces for one final assault, but he knew, without a miracle, they would lose. That miracle arrived in the form of a blue-skinned warrior wielding a glowing saber. Aayla Secura stepped into the light once more, and the Twi'leks rose with her. The city of Lesu stood as the final Imperial stronghold on Rylot. Towering walls surrounded it, thick with turbo-laser cannons, and guarded by legions of stormtroopers. TIE fighters screeched overhead, patrolling the skies, while inside the city, AT-ST walkers prowled the streets like mechanical beasts, ready to crush any resistance. For years, the Twi'lek people had suffered under Imperial rule. The streets ran with fear, the air thick with the despair of a conquered people. But tonight, that was about to change. Aayla Secura stood atop a rocky outcrop, overlooking the city. Beside her, Cham Syndulla and his most trusted fighters knelt, studying the defences below. "This is our only chance," Cham muttered, gripping his blaster tightly. "If we fail here, Rylot will never rise again." Aayla exhaled slowly, feeling the force weave through the city, through the fear, through the hope. "We won't fail," she said. She ignited her blue lightsaber. A moment later, the signal was given and the battle began. The first wave of Twi'lek rebels rushed the outer gates, carrying heavy explosives on their backs. Stormtroopers stationed above fired immediately, red blaster bolts raining down like death itself. Screams filled the air. But before the Imperials could cut down advancing rebels, Aayla moved. She sprinted forward at inhuman speed, deflecting blaster fire as she leapt straight up the wall. One trooper fell with a quick saber stroke. Another flung backwards by the force, smashing into a turret. Aayla twisted mid-air, her blade slicing through a heavy gun emplacement before it could fire. Below, Cham's forces planted their charges. The walls shattered inward, sending flames and debris flying into the night sky. The Twi'lek rebels poured through the breach, engaging the stormtroopers in brutal close combat. Blasters fired in every direction. Explosions tore through the city streets. Aayla didn't stop moving. She darted through the chaos, her lightsaber a blur of blue light as she cut a path forward. The first defences had fallen, but the battle was far from over. The Imperials dug in deep, fortifying key positions along the winding bridges and narrow alleyways that made up Lesu's inner district. The walkers arrived next. A pair of AT-STs stomped into the fight, their laser cannons firing indiscriminately into the rebel ranks. Cham's forces were pinned down. Aayla knew what she had to do. She ran full speed at the first walker, dodging blaster fire as she jumped onto a nearby building. The AT-ST turned toward her, its massive guns swinging into position. Aayla leapt. She landed on the cockpit, driving her saber deep into its armour. Sparks erupted as she tore through the controls, disabling the machine in seconds. The walker staggered before collapsing into a nearby building, crushing Imperial reinforcements below. The AT-ST swiveled toward her, preparing to fire. But before it could, a squad of Twi'lek rocket launchers fired from the rooftops. A deafening explosion lit up the battlefield as the walker was torn apart. The Imperials were losing ground. The Twi'lek fighters rallied, pushing forward with renewed strength. The city was nearly theirs. But then, the air turned ice cold. Aayla felt them before she saw them. She stood in the centre, her breathing heavy, her muscles burning. Then, the shadows moved. 2 figures emerged from the darkness. They were clad in black armor, their red lightsabers igniting with a hiss. The 5th brother loomed like a beast, his massive form crackling with sheer physical power. The 7th sister was more elegant, slender, calculating, her twin blades spinning effortlessly in her hands. Ayla's grip tightened on her saber. The Jedi are extinct, the 5th brother rumbled. His voice was slow, deliberate. And you will join them. Ayla did not reply. She simply raised her blade and waited for the attack. The 5th brother struck first, his blade coming down like a hammer. Ayla barely managed to sidestep, the ground shattering beneath his attack. The 7th sister lunged from behind, her saber spinning like a saw blade. Ayla dropped low, sliding between them as she slashed at their legs. The 5th brother blocked, but as she kicked his knee, sending him staggering, the 7th sister hissed, flipping backwards onto a nearby ledge. The real fight was beginning. The 7th sister was fast. Her dual spinning sabers were like a storm of fire, striking from every angle. Ayla twisted, dodged, blocked, barely keeping up. Ayla lunged in close, trying to press the attack. The 7th sister grinned and unleashed a forced push. Ayla flew backward, slamming into a stone pillar, pain exploding through her back. The 7th sister moved in for the kill. Ayla, in a desperate attempt, threw her saber. The blue blade spun through the air. The 7th sister barely dodged in time, but that moment of hesitation was all Ayla needed. She surged forward, caught her saber mid-air, and drove it straight into the 7th sister's chest. The Inquisitor's eyes went wide. The 5th brother roared. With terrifying speed, he closed the distance, his saber swinging like a war axe. Ayla blocked high, but the impact nearly dislocated her shoulder. The 5th brother pressed forward, slamming her onto the defensive. His blade was pure brute force, each attack sending shockwaves through her body. Ayla could not win with raw strength. She had to outthink him. She dodged left, feinted right. The 5th brother overextended. Ayla slashed upwards, slicing through his wrist. He screamed as his hand fell to the ground. Before he could recover, Ayla plunged her saber through his chest. The 5th brother collapsed. The battle was over. Lesu was free. The Twi'lek people had won. But before the celebrations could begin, the ground trembled, and the air turned to ice once again. A single Lambda-class shuttle descended from the stars. The crowd fell silent. They could all feel it before they even saw him. An overwhelming presence, a shadow that crushed the air itself. Then, the shuttle door opened, and Darth Vader stepped onto the streets of Rael. The rebellion trembled. Ayla felt what true fear really was. The Twi'lek warriors raised their blasters, but with a single hand, Vader shattered every blaster into dust. Then he spoke. Ayla Secura. His voice echoed across the city. You will die here. Ayla gritted her teeth and ignited her lightsaber. She had fought many battles, but she had never faced a monster like this. Vader attacked. His strike nearly broke her wrists. Ayla stumbled back, struggling to block his strength. He was toying with her. She darted left, trying to outmaneuver him, but he caught her mid-air with the force and slammed her into the ground. Pain shot through her body. Vader didn't even break a sweat. You are weak, he said, striding toward her. Ayla forced herself up. She would not die kneeling. She launched herself at him, striking with all her skill. But Vader parried effortlessly, then backhanded her across the face. She hit the dirt, blood dripping from her lips. Vader stood over her. This is your end. Ayla made one last stand. She pushed herself up, breathing heavily. Her people were watching. She had to give them hope. One last time. With a defiant cry, she charged Vader, and his red blade struck her down. The battle was over. Lesu fell. Raelot was lost. But the legend of Aayla Secura lived on. The Twi'lek people would never forget her. Aayla Secura, the warrior of Raelot. What if Kit Fisto survived Order 66? As tensions in the galaxy reached their breaking point, Jedi Master Kit Fisto sat within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, his mind clouded with unease. The Jedi Council had uncovered damning evidence. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine was, in truth, Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had orchestrated the Clone Wars from the shadows. Mace Windu, alongside Masters, Saesee Tiin, Aegon Kolar, and Fisto himself, were to confront the Chancellor. But before they left, Windu gave Fisto a new task. Kit, we need someone to stay here and relay the Council's findings to the other Jedi across the galaxy. If things go badly, the Order must know the truth. Kit Fisto, though eager to fight, understood the importance of the mission. He stayed behind, reaching out to the Jedi stationed on distant worlds. Aayla Secura on Felucia, Plo Koon over Caeda Nemodia, and Ki-Adi-Mundi on Mygeeto. Each message was urgent, warning them that the Sith had seized control of the Republic. But before he could contact them all, the temple shook violently. A sense of dread washed over him. The night sky was illuminated by flames as blaster fire echoed through the halls. Kit rushed to a window and saw the impossible. Clones, led by a lone figure draped in black, storming the temple. He watched in horror as Anakin Skywalker, once the Order's greatest warrior, cut down Jedi without hesitation. He knew he couldn't stay. With Jedi falling all around him, he made his way through hidden corridors beneath the temple, using his aquatic agility to maneuver through submerged escape tunnels known only to a few. Emerging into the underbelly of Coruscant, he evaded patrols and bounty hunters seeking to collect the growing bounty on Jedi heads. For months he moved in silence, avoiding detection. The Order was dead, but the fight was not over. He needed a new purpose. Kit's journey took him to Mon Cala, the ocean world where he had once fought alongside the Mon Calamari and their warriors, including a young Admiral Ackbar. He arrived under the cover of darkness, swimming deep into the royal city of Mon Cala, where King Li Chair now ruled. Revealing himself to Ackbar, the two warriors exchanged solemn greetings. The Mon Calamari had suffered under the Empire's rule. Imperial governors had seized control of their world, enslaving its people and strip mining the planet for resources. Fisto saw an opportunity. The Empire is not invincible, Kit said. I have fought beside your people before, and I will do so again. Together, we can drive them from your world. King Li Chair, though hesitant at first, knew the Jedi spoke the truth. His people longed for freedom, and with Kit Fisto and Admiral Ackbar leading them, they had their chance to reclaim it. The rebellion on Mon Cala would begin. The first attack came swiftly. Kit Fisto, wielding his green lightsaber, led a strike force against an underwater Imperial refinery. Stormtroopers and Imperial officers were caught completely off guard, unprepared for the speed of a Jedi underwater. Blaster bolts flew through the depths, slowed by the resistance of the ocean, but Fisto moved like a torpedo, weaving between shots with inhuman agility. His saber cut through armor like paper, and with his powerful force-enhanced swimming, he could strike before enemies even saw him coming. As Imperial reinforcements arrived in underwater assault craft, Kit reached out with the Force, creating powerful currents that sent the machine spiraling out of control. Ackbar led Mon Calamari warriors in coordinated attacks, disabling Imperial turrets and cutting off escape routes. Within hours, the refinery was in their hands. News of the Jedi's survival and the rebellion's first victory spread like wildfire. The Empire responded in kind. 2 Inquisitors, one a tall, gaunt Powin wielding a crimson double-bladed saber, the other a masked Zabrak with a curved, single-bladed weapon, descended into the darkened depths of Mon Cala. Their advanced breathing apparatus and reinforced armour allowed them to function underwater, but they were slow, their movements sluggish against the weight of the ocean. Kit Fisto was already waiting. From the darkness, his emerald lightsaber casting an airy glow through the water. He moved with uncanny speed, his Nautolan physiology allowing him to maneuver as though he were one with the currents. The Powin Inquisitor lashed out first, his spinning saber carving a red arc through the murky depths, but Kit was gone before the blade even came close. Using the Force, he propelled himself backward in a burst of speed, then twisted into an elegant somersault, the water bending around his form. Before the Inquisitor could react, Kit surged forward, striking like a torpedo. His saber slashed at the Powin's armour, leaving a deep gash across his chestplate. The Zabrak Inquisitor attempted to flank him, thrusting forward with a brutal overhead strike. Kit tilted sideways, letting the attack glide past him, then delivered a devastating underwater kick. The sheer force sent the Inquisitor spiralling backward, colliding with a jagged coral formation. "You fight like surface dwellers," Kit taunted, his voice carried by the currents. "You do not belong here." The Powin Inquisitor sneered and extended a hand, unleashing a violent push of the Force. But the moment the energy crackled through the water, it weakened, dispersing. Kit barely flinched. The ocean does not obey the dark side. With a flick of his wrist, Kit swirled his saber in an elegant arc and darted forward again. His speed was overwhelming. The Inquisitors could barely track his movements. He slashed at the Zabrak's breathing mask, severing the tubes with pinpoint precision. The Inquisitor choked, gasping as water flooded his lungs. His saber flickered as he flailed, his body drifting limply toward the ocean floor. The Powin tried to retreat, pushing himself upward toward the surface, but Kit was faster. With a powerful burst of the Force, he created a swirling vortex of water, dragging the Sith downward into the depths. The Inquisitor thrashed, his movements desperate, but Kit approached with calm precision. With one final strike, he drove his saber cleanly through the assassin's chest. The red glow of his weapon faded as his body was swallowed by the abyss. Kit Fisto took a deep breath, letting the quiet of the ocean settle around him once more. The battle was won. The Inquisitors had failed, but there was still one major battle to fight. The Imperial Oceanic Fortress was a monstrosity of durasteel and glass, a submerged citadel bristling with laser turrets and legions of stormtroopers. It loomed over the deep trenches of Mon Cala, a symbol of the Empire's grip on the world. But tonight, that grip would be broken. From the depths, a vast army of Mon Calamari warriors and Quarren insurgents approached, their weapons glinting in the bioluminescent glow of the ocean. Leading them was Admiral Akbar, his voice booming through the comms. "This is our moment. We fight not just for Mon Cala, but for every world suffering under the Empire's rule. We take the fortress, or we die trying." Kit Fisto swam ahead of the vanguard, his lightsaber igniting once more. The first wave of stormtroopers attempted to intercept him, firing blaster bolts into the water. The shots were sluggish, their energy dispersed by the liquid, but the Mon Cala warriors charged fearlessly. Kit weaved through the chaos, moving faster than the eye could track. He struck from all angles, his saber cutting cleanly through the trooper's armor. As an Imperial submersible launched torpedoes through the rebels, he extended his hand, sending the missiles spiraling harmlessly into the abyss. The fortress's blast doors sealed shut, but Akbar had anticipated this. Detonators! Breach the entrance! A squad of Quarren insurgents swam forward, planting charges along the Durasteel doors. The explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the water, tearing the entrance apart. The rebels flooded inside, engaging the Imperials in brutal close-quarters combat. Inside the control room, an Imperial Moff sneered as he watched the battle unfold. Flood the lower levels. Drown them. Giant turbines roared to life, unleashing a powerful current meant to wash the rebels away. But Kit Fisto swam directly into the torrent, using his force to push against it. He channeled his strength, redirecting the current back toward the Imperials, sending them crashing into walls with bone-shattering force. Finally, Kit reached the command center. The Moff fumbled for his blaster, but the Jedi was already upon him. With a flick of his saber, the weapon was cleaved in two. This planet belongs to its people. Your empire is finished here. The Moff snarled, but before he could speak, Kit struck him down. With one final motion, he deactivated the fortress's defenses, opening the floodgates for the Mon Cala fleet to storm the stronghold. Within the hour, the fortress had fallen. Mon Cala was free. On the steps of the royal palace, King Li Char stood before a massive crowd of Mon Calamari and Quarren, their voices roaring in celebration. Kit Fisto stood beside him, alongside Admiral Akbar and the victorious warriors of the rebellion. King Li Char raised his hand and the crowd fell silent. For too long, our world has suffered under the Empire's boot. For too long, we have watched our people taken as slaves, our cities burned, our oceans poisoned, but no more. The crowd erupted in cheers. Tonight, Mon Cala stands free once again, and we shall not stand alone. We will not be silent while others suffer as we have. We will take our fight beyond these waters, to the stars. The Empire believes it can break the will of the galaxy, but it cannot break us. Today, Mon Cala joins the rebellion. The roar of the people echoed across the waves. Kit Fisto looked up at the sky, a quiet smile on his face. The Jedi may have fallen, but hope was still alive, and the war was far from over. What if Plo Koon used Force Judgement on Darth Vader? The flaming wreckage of Plo Koon's Jedi starfighter smouldered on the outskirts of a desolate plateau on Cato Nemodia. The city above hung in eerie silence, its grand bridges no longer patrolled by clone troopers, but by the cold indifference of war's aftermath. Pain, confusion, betrayal. Plo Koon's breath was ragged as he pulled himself from the wreckage, his body aching, his robes torn, his Kel Dor mask cracked from the impact, barely keeping his breathing stable. He remembered the attack, his own men turning on him in an instant. The betrayal had been so sudden, so absolute, that he hadn't even had time to react before the blaster fire tore his ship apart. He had trusted them. He had trusted the Jedi Order. The Force swirled around him, whispering, guiding, revealing the truth. He could feel something terrible had happened. Something beyond the Jedi alone. The Order was gone. The Jedi, his family, his brothers and sisters, had been exterminated. Plo Koon clenched his fists, his deep-set eyes narrowing. No, He would not stand by. He would strike back. Plo Koon disappeared into the criminal underworld, moving from Nar Shaddaa to Ord Mantell, seeking any rumour of surviving Jedi. The galaxy was now a hunting ground, and Darth Vader was its apex predator. But Plo Koon had always been a hunter in his own right. Then the pieces slowly fell into place. Clones defecting, Jedi hiding, resistance brewing, and finally, he found her, Ahsoka Tano. She was no longer the young girl he had once brought to the Jedi Temple as a child. She had survived Order 66, escaped, and now fought in the shadows alongside Captain Rex and his fellow rebellious clones. Their reunion was not one of joy, but of purpose. "We can't just hide," Plo Koon told her, his voice heavy with conviction. "We must bring the fight to the Empire." Ahsoka hesitated. She had seen what Vader could do. He's not just some Sith," she admitted. "He's a monster." Plo Koon did not waver. "Then we make the monster bleed." And so, they set their trap. The chosen battlefield was an isolated planet, long abandoned, a place where Vader would have no reinforcements, a place where he would have no escape. Ahsoka Tano and Rex sent word through Imperial channels that a Jedi had been spotted. Vader took the bait, arriving alone. He needed no army. He had become one. The howl of his TIE Advanced echoed as it descended onto the craggy surface. The moment his ship touched the ground, the trap was sprung. Explosions erupted around him. Blaster fire rained down from hidden positions. But Vader was unstoppable. He deflected every bolt with unnatural precision. Rex and his men fired with everything they had, but they were not his targets. Vader raised a single hand and crushed the rocks above them, sending an avalanche into the rebels' position. But then, a storm of lightning erupted. But this was no natural storm. This was Plo Koon's Force judgement. Electric golden light erupted from Plo Koon's fingertips, arcing like chains of judgment itself. Vader's armor was highly conductive, designed by Palpatine to ensure his subjugation. Now it worked against him. Lightning wrapped around him, surging into his life support systems. Sparks burst from his mask, his vocoder glitching as he let out a choking, distorted roar. He tried to raise his saber, but his body convulsed. His metallic limbs spasmed, refusing to obey. Plo Koon stepped forward, pushing more power into the attack. The air burned. The ground cracked beneath his feet. Vader fell to his knees. Plo Koon stopped. The dark figure before him had collapsed. Smoke rose from his armor, his mechanical breathing faltering. Ahsoka moved forward. But then she froze. So did Rex. Because as the mask cracked open, as Plo Koon reached down, they saw a scarred face, a face they knew, Anakin Skywalker. They took Vader, or rather, they took Anakin Skywalker. They brought him to a hidden Force Nexus world, a planet brimming with the energy of the light side of the Force. Anakin was their prisoner, his lightsaber confiscated, his body weakened, but Ahsoka stayed. She sat beside him for months, watching over him as he healed. She spoke to him, trying to understand. Ahsoka sat just outside the heavy blast door, her back pressed against the cold metal. The only thing separating her from Vader was a thin sheet of reinforced durasteel, yet it may as well have been a galaxy. It had been months since they had brought him here, weeks of silence. Through the door, she could feel his presence, twisting, writhing, a storm of rage and pain. It pulsed like a wounded beast, wounded, yet unwilling to let go of its hatred. She had tried everything. She had spoken to him daily, telling him stories of the Jedi, of Obi-Wan, of their time in the Clone Wars. She had left him food, even though she doubted he needed it in that metal shell. She had even tried reaching through the Force, only to be met with a wall of fury and darkness. Still, she refused to give up. Finally, one day, she stood and keyed in the override code. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. The figure inside barely moved. Vader sat in the center of the room, his posture rigid, his breathing deep and mechanical, his helmeted face tilted slightly, acknowledging her presence, but no words came. Ahsoka took a breath and stepped inside. "I know you can hear me," she said, keeping her voice firm, "and I know you're not beyond saving." Silence. She pressed forward. "You don't have to stay like this, Anakin." His head snapped toward her at the name, a flicker of movement, of something beneath the void. His fingers twitched. She seized on it. "Anakin." A roar of rage erupted from him as he lifted his shackled hands, and the Force exploded outward. Ahsoka barely had time to react before she was flung backward, her back slamming into the wall. She gasped, but instead of fear, she only felt determination. He had responded. Vader rose to his feet, his cape billowing around him. The room darkened, the shadows stretching toward him, as if their very air bowed in his presence. "Anakin Skywalker is dead," he growled, his voice a thunderclap of hatred. Ahsoka's heart clenched, but she did not flinch. She took a step forward. "You're lying," she said softly. His fists clenched, the metal groaning under the pressure. "You are a fool, child." Ahsoka shook her head. "I know what Palpatine did to you," she continued. "He broke you, twisted you, but this?" She gestured to his armor, his prison. "This isn't who you are." Vader's breath hitched, just for a moment, a second of hesitation. Then, fury returned. The Force lashed out again, but this time Ahsoka braced herself, standing firm as the pressure pushed against her. She stepped closer. "Anakin," she whispered, "I miss you." His breathing hitched. The Force wavered. Ahsoka saw it, just a fraction of hesitation, but it was there, a crack in the wall. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered. "I'll never stop fighting for you." Vader turned away. "Leave," he growled, his voice strained as if something deep within him fought against itself. But Ahsoka would not leave. Instead, she sat down beside him, close, but not too close, and she waited. Vader wandered through the darkened jungle, his heavy boots crunching against thick roots and damp moss. The cave before him loomed like gaping maw, the air around it thick with unseen energy. He didn't know what drove him here, only that the Force whispered, and he obeyed. Stepping inside, the temperature dropped instantly. The shadows stretched unnaturally, curling around him like fingers. Then, a figure stepped forward from the darkness. Anakin Skywalker? Not the broken, mutilated monster he had become, but the Jedi Knight, the hero of the Republic. Vader stiffened. A trick. Anakin's reflection only smiled. Is it? Then the world shifted. The Jedi Temple. Vader stood in the council chambers, but it was different. He saw himself, kneeling before Yoda, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. His robes were still Jedi brown. His eyes, still bright, full of fire, but not consumed by it. Skywalker, Obi-Wan said, smiling, we have much to discuss. Vader's breath caught in his throat. This was wrong. This is not what happened. Anakin turned, and the image in the glass of the window changed. Padme, holding their child, a boy and a girl. Her laughter echoed through the chamber. You came home, she said, eyes full of love and joy. Vader stepped forward, a trembling hand reaching for the vision. But then it shattered. The world twisted, contorted, and suddenly, he was in their apartment on Coruscant. Padme stood before him, but her eyes were dark, full of fury and disgust. Monster, she spat, stepping back in revulsion. You're a monster. No, Vader whispered, reaching for her. She recoiled. How could I ever love this? His heart hammering against his chest as he felt a deep, gut-wrenching pain he had not felt in years. The shadows in the cave tightened around him. You did this, she continued, her voice twisting into something inhuman, cruel, accusatory. You killed the Jedi. You killed our love. You killed me. Vader fell to his knees. Stop! The darkness coiled, pressing in. You will never be Anakin Skywalker again, the voices whispered. You are nothing. A tool. A machine. And for the first time, Vader felt afraid. It was in that moment that Qui-Gon Jinn appeared to him. When Ahsoka returned months later, she found not Darth Vader, but Anakin Skywalker. I see now, he said, voice quiet, what I have become. She could feel the change in him. The dark side had left him, and in its place, balance. It was time. It was time to end Sidious. The rebellion leaders, Plo Koon, Ahsoka Tano, and now Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi reborn, would strike at the heart of the Empire. And in the throne room of Coruscant, Sidious awaited. He knew it was coming. The fleet emerged from hyperspace, their ships roaring towards Coruscant's upper atmosphere. Venator-class Star Destroyers, hijacked and repurposed by Plo Koon's Jedi loyalists, bore down on Imperial defences. Modified Y-Wings and ARC-170 starfighters strafed Imperial strongholds. Republic-era clones, those who had resisted their programming and joined Plo Koon, launched into the fray, their blaster rifles humming. At the head of the strike force, Anakin Skywalker, his TIE Advanced, repainted in Republic colours, led the aerial charge. At his side, Ahsoka Tano piloted her own sleek Jedi starfighter, its blue and white markings slicing through the darkness of space. And aboard the lead Venator, in the war room, Plo Koon stood watching. This battle is bigger than us, he said. We are not here for revenge. We are here for justice. The streets of Coruscant shook as the Jedi strike force landed in the lower districts. Troopers loyal to the Jedi have infiltrated the Empire's ranks, turned their weapons on their former comrades. Blaster fire tore through the night. Imperial walkers fell as rocket fire struck their weak points. The citizens of Coruscant, once silent under Imperial rule, rose up in rebellion, and at the heart of it, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Plo Koon charged towards the Imperial Palace. Sidious awaited them. The massive doors of the Imperial Palace opened with a thunderous groan. A long hallway stretched before them, lined with black pillars, each carved with Sith inscriptions. At the end of the hall, seated upon a dark throne of metal, was Emperor Palpatine. His golden eyes burned in the dimly lit chamber. Sinister smile crept across his lips. "So," he rasped, his voice as sharp as a dagger, "my wayward apprentice returns, with old fools by his side." Anakin stepped forward. "I am not your apprentice," he said, voice steady. "Not anymore." Palpatine chuckled. "Ah, but you were, and you could be again." His withered hands rose, dark energy coiling around his fingertips. "No more words," Plo Koon interrupted, stepping beside Anakin, his lightsaber ignited, casting a golden glow. "We finished this." Ahsoka ignited her twin sabers. Anakin did not reach for a weapon. He stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the Sith. "I don't need a lightsaber," he said, voice filled with certainty. Palpatine's grin widened. With a scream of unnatural fury, the Sith Lord attacked. The throne room erupted in chaos. Sidious moved faster than any of them had ever seen. His red lightsaber flashed, striking at Plo Koon and Ahsoka simultaneously. The air itself crackled as dark energy poured from the Sith Lord's form. Plo Koon deflected each strike, his mastery of defensive combat unparalleled. Ahsoka, ever the duelist, matched Sidious blow for blow, her twin sabers weaving an intricate dance. But Anakin did not move. His eyes closed, and he felt the Force in its entirety. He heard the whispers of Qui-Gon Jinn. He now understood true balance. Then, as Sidious lunged, Anakin raised a single hand and stopped the Sith Lord mid-air. Sidious froze, his face twisting in shock as invisible hands of the Force gripped him. Anakin's eyes opened, glowing with an intensity unseen in years. "You can't stop me, boy," Sidious hissed, struggling against Anakin's grip. Anakin took a step forward. "You're wrong." And with a single, devastating motion, he hurled Sidious across the room. The Sith Lord crashed into the far wall, his bones cracking upon impact. Palpatine was afraid. But Sidious was never defenseless. Even as he lay crumpled, he let out an unearthly shriek, his hands firing a wave of Sith lightning at Anakin. Plo Koon leaped into the attack. The Keldor Jedi Master absorbed the full blast, his body convulsing as the dark energy tore through him. Anakin's eyes widened in horror as Plo Koon fell to his knees, smoke rising from his burnt robes. "Master!" Ahsoka screamed. Plo Koon looked up at them, his breathing mask cracked, his eyes dimming, and then he collapsed, dead. Anakin's breathing came ragged. Something deep inside him cracked. Sidious grinned, blood dripping from his mouth. "Now, boy," he sneered, "show me what you really are." Anakin lifted his hands. The entire throne room trembled. The walls cracked. The pillars shook. The ceiling groaned as if the planet itself feared his power. Sidious tried to move, but the Force crushed down upon him. Anakin floated off the ground, his body glowing in the golden hue of pure, unfiltered power. Palpatine let out a wretched snarl, and Anakin closed his fist. The Force crushed down upon the Sith Lord, slamming him into the ground. Sidious screamed in agony, his body collapsing under the sheer weight of the Force. Anakin did not stop. Tears streamed down his face as he broke the Sith apart, piece by piece. Sidious gasped, his body imploding under the invisible pressure, and then, with one final cry, the Sith Lord was gone. The battle ended. Palpatine was dead. Coruscant fell silent. Ahsoka stared at Anakin, breathing heavily. You did it, she whispered. Anakin looked at her, then at the fallen form of Plo Koon, and he closed his eyes. The war was over. The Jedi were gone. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Welcome back to Fan Friday, a series where I pick one of you guys' what if theories every week. Thanks to Skullstorm for this video. What if Jedi Battlemaster Sin Dralig trained Anakin Skywalker? From the moment Anakin Skywalker was brought before the Jedi High Council, there was much debate over his training. Yoda, skeptical of the boy's future, was hesitant, while Obi-Wan Kenobi, despite his promise to Qui-Gon Jinn, was not ready to take on such a responsibility. It was Master Windu who ultimately suggested a different path. The boy is powerful, Windu had said. If he is to be trained, he must be disciplined. He must learn restraint before he learns freedom. Thus, Anakin Skywalker was not placed under Obi-Wan Kenobi's mentorship, but instead handed over to Sin Dralig, Jedi Battlemaster and Chief of Security for the Jedi Temple. Master Dralig was a stern, disciplined teacher. Unlike Obi-Wan, who balanced mentorship with camaraderie, Dralig offered no warmth, only guidance, only training. From the moment Anakin became his Padawan, his days were consumed by relentless drills, force control exercises, and deep philosophical discussions about what it meant to be a Jedi. Skill without control is recklessness, Dralig told him during one of their first training sessions, standing in the dojo deep within the Jedi Temple. And recklessness is the road to the dark side. Anakin learned all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, a feat that very few Jedi accomplished. Form 5, Gem So, became his primary form, allowing him to dominate in battle. But Dralig forced him to master Makashi for dueling precision, Ataru for mobility, and even Niman for balance. Anakin's transformation was profound. The raw, emotional fighter that Qui-Gon had discovered on Tatooine became a refined warrior, the living embodiment of Jedi combat philosophy. But Dralig also taught restraint, reminding Anakin that power was a tool, not a crutch. You do not win a battle with your blade alone, Dralig often said. You win it with your mind. The lessons stuck. When the Clone Wars erupted, Anakin Skywalker was one of the Jedi's greatest assets. His skill on the battlefield was unparalleled. His ability to read the flow of combat, to command, to strategize, was second only to Master Yoda. His first test came on Jabim, where the Republic was suffering heavy losses. The torrential rains turned the battlefield into mud, and the Separatists, led by General Stratus, had set up an ambush. The Republic forces were being crushed. Dralig and Anakin led a counter-offensive. The two Jedi fought side by side, with Anakin carving through the droids with lightning-fast precision. He switched between forms fluidly. Makashi to slice through the gaps in enemy defences, Ataru to leap from the trenches to high ground, Sarisu to deflect blaster bolts. At one point, a squadron of droidekas rolled in, their shields flickering to life. Dralig signalled Anakin, and without hesitation, he switched to Juyo, the most aggressive form of lightsaber combat. His strikes became unpredictable, overwhelming, a storm of controlled fury. Within seconds, the droidekas fell, their shields pierced, their bodies crumpled in the mud. The Republic forces rallied. Jabim was won. Dralig watched his apprentice closely that day. I trained you to be a Jedi, he said. Today, you fought like a warrior. Remember the difference. Anakin took those words to heart. By the 3rd year of the war, Anakin had become a Jedi General and the single greatest duelist in the Order. Palpatine had taken notice. The Chancellor invited Anakin to private meetings, offering him wisdom, tempting him with the promise of greater power. But Dralig's training had left Anakin immune to manipulation. Power is meaningless without purpose, Anakin once told the Chancellor, echoing Dralig's teachings, and the Jedi served the greatest purpose in the galaxy. Palpatine's plan to corrupt Anakin had failed, but he had one more trick: Order 66. When Palpatine issued Order 66, Anakin was not at the Jedi Temple. He was on Felucia, fighting alongside Aayla Secura. When the clones turned, Anakin's reaction was instant. His blade ignited in a flash of blue, and before the clone troopers could react, he had already cut down the first squad. His movements were flawless, switching from Form 3 to deflect blaster fire, then into Form 5 to strike down the betrayers with overwhelming strength. Aayla, caught off guard, was surrounded. In a blur of motion, Anakin moved faster than the clones could react, cutting them down before a single shot hit its mark. By the time the battle was over, the field was littered with clone bodies. Felucia had fallen silent. Anakin turned to Aayla, breathing heavily. "We need to get back to Coruscant. We need to save the temple." But by the time they had arrived, it was already too late. The Jedi Temple burned. His master, Sin Dralig, was dead. His body was found in the ruins of the dojo, surrounded by the bodies of fallen clones that he had gone down fighting. The loss hit Anakin harder than anything before. His mentor, his guide, the man who shaped him into the Jedi he had become, gone. Palpatine's voice echoed in the HoloNet transmission. The Jedi betrayed us. The Jedi must be destroyed. But Anakin knew the truth, and he would not let the Sith win. With Dralig gone, Anakin took up his master's mantle. He gathered the surviving Jedi, Shaak Ti, Quinlan Vos, Aayla Secura, and others. He found Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. Together, they formed a resistance. The galaxy was in darkness. With the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire, Coruscant had become the heart of Sith rule. The newly anointed Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne. Under the leadership of Anakin and the surviving Jedi, the scattered remnants of the Order regrouped in the Outer Rim. Their numbers were few, but they were strong. From secret hideouts on remote worlds, the Jedi began striking back. Anakin led the first attack, a surgical strike on an Imperial outpost on Kamino, where the cloning program continued under Palpatine's control. Anakin, Shaak Ti, and Vos infiltrated the facility, cutting down stormtroopers with unmatched precision. Vos, a master of stealth and unorthodox methods, handled sabotage, while Shaak Ti guided them through the cloning chambers. Anakin faced off against an entire squadron of purge troopers, overwhelming them with sheer speed and technique. With the facility destroyed, Palpatine took notice. He had underestimated the last of the Jedi. The Jedi could no longer remain in the shadows. Anakin made the decision to strike at the heart of the Empire, Coruscant. But he couldn't do it alone. Anakin reached out to Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, seeking allies among the early rebellion. With their help, an assault was planned. The Jedi would lead the charge into the Imperial Palace. Their mission? Destroy the Sith. As the battle commenced, the skies of Coruscant were set ablaze. Starfighters clashed in the upper atmosphere as rebel forces fought to break through Imperial blockades. Below, Jedi cut through stormtroopers and Imperial guards, moving as a single unstoppable force. Anakin and Obi-Wan led the charge into the throne room of the Imperial Palace, where Darth Sidious awaited them. The Emperor grinned. So, the Chosen One returns. How disappointing. Sidious ignited his crimson saber. He was powerful, but Anakin was stronger. With his mastery of all 7 lightsaber forms, Anakin fought in ways no Jedi had ever fought before. He used Gemso to overpower, Makashi to counter, Ataru to strike from impossible angles. His movements were so fast, so precise, that even Palpatine struggled to keep up. Obi-Wan provided support, using Surisu to deflect Palpatine's lightning, while Yoda leapt into the fight, pressuring the Sith Lord from all sides. But Palpatine was still the Dark Lord of the Sith. With a violent burst of dark energy, he sent Yoda flying and turned his full focus on Anakin. "You could have been my greatest creation," Palpatine hissed, striking with all his fury. Anakin's blade met every strike. Then, he let go of his saber. Palpatine's eyes widened as Anakin reached out with the Force. Everything froze. Anakin was beyond the need for a weapon. He crushed Palpatine's lightsaber in his hand, letting the shards fall to the floor. The Sith Lord felt afraid. Palpatine was lifted off the ground, his body twisting in agony, as Anakin's sheer power crushed him from all sides. The Jedi watched as the Emperor, the greatest Sith Lord in history, was ripped apart by the Chosen One. With one final scream, Sidious was no more. With Palpatine gone, the Empire crumbled. Anakin, standing over the ruins of the throne room, turned to the Jedi. "The war is over." Yoda nodded. "Much to rebuild, there is." But Anakin felt something else. The Jedi Order had fallen because it had lost its way, because it had been blinded by tradition and politics. That could never happen again. Instead of restoring the old order, Anakin, alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda, founded something new. A Jedi Order without arrogance, without corruption, and without fear. What if Rahm Kota trained Ezra Bridger? Lothal was a dying world. The Empire had sunk its claws into its soil, stripping it bare for resources, leaving its people with nothing. Stormtroopers patrolled every street, and whispers of rebellion were met with blaster fire. At Old Joe's cantina, a man sat at the farthest table, his long grey hair unkempt, his beard tangled, a glass of Corellian whiskey clutched in his calloused hands. He wore old, faded armour, battered and scratched, once belonging to a warrior, now just a relic. Rahm Kota. He was a regular in the cantina, known as nothing more than the washed-up drunk. The few people who bothered speaking to him still called him General, though he hadn't commanded anything in years. "Back in my day," Kota slurred, slamming his glass on the table, "we had real soldiers. We fought for something worth dying for, not like you bucketheads." A group of stormtroopers turned their helmets toward him. One of them stepped forward, shoving Kota back into his chair. "Shut your mouth, old man," the trooper warned. "You don't want trouble." Kota chuckled, taking another sip. "You don't know the first thing about trouble, kid." Just as things were about to escalate, a loud explosion rocked the street outside. The stormtroopers turned immediately toward the entrance, blasters drawn. A few sprinted out into the street, barking into their comms. Kota leaned back, watching with mild amusement. That's when he saw him. A teenage boy, dark, hair messy, blue eyes sharp, darting through the cantina's entrance, sliding past the stormtroopers and slipping out of sight into the back alleys. The boy moved fast. Too fast. And that's when Kota felt it. The Force. His drunken haze lifted slightly as he watched the kid disappear into the street. Rahm Kota, once a Jedi General, had found an apprentice. Kota had nothing better to do, and the kid intrigued him. He followed Ezra Bridger through the winding streets of Lothal, keeping his distance. The boy moved with experience. He knew how to stay out of sight. Eventually, Ezra arrived at an abandoned communications spire, slipping inside through a gap in the structure. Kota smirked. Clever. The old Jedi stepped forward and rapped on the metal wall. "Hey, kid!" Inside, Ezra tensed. He reached for the blaster he kept under a crate. "I know you're in there," Kota said. "Don't bother trying to run. I'll just find you again." Silence. Then, Ezra slowly stepped into view. "You're that drunk from the cantina," he said, crossing his arms. Kota took a step forward. "And you're a thief. Not exactly a great first impression for either of us." Ezra narrowed his eyes. "What do you want?" Kota exhaled, running a hand through his tangled beard. "I felt something, kid. The Force." Ezra stiffened. "You're strong in it. Stronger than you know." Kota took another step. "I can train you." Ezra scoffed. "You? You can barely stand without a drink." Kota grinned. "Maybe, but I could still break you in a fight." Ezra wasn't convinced. He had no reason to trust this man. But something inside him, a whisper in the Force, told him that Kota was different. "Not interested," Ezra said, retreating deeper into the spire. Kota watched him go. He smirked. The kid would come around. He followed Ezra everywhere, always watching, always offering. "Still not interested?" Kota asked one evening, leaning against a wall while Ezra finished one of his usual heists. Ezra sighed. "No." "Fine," Kota straightened. "Guess I'll have to show you why you should be." And with that, he walked straight toward an Imperial checkpoint. Ezra's eyes widened. "What do you—" Kota stopped in front of a squad of stormtroopers. "Hey boys," Kota said, cracking his neck. "I heard there's a war criminal loose around here. Maybe you should worry about me instead of some kid." Blasters raised. The next few seconds were chaos. Kota moved like a ghost. He ignited a green lightsaber, a relic of another time, and cut through the first stormtrooper in a single slash. Blaster fire rained down, but Kota was untouchable. He parried bolts with impossibly fast movements, his blade deflecting every shot. Then, in a single spinning motion, he cut down 3 troopers in one stroke. Ezra couldn't believe what he was seeing. The last stormtrooper standing tried to run. Kota flung his hand forward, sending the trooper crashing into a wall with the Force. Silence. Kota deactivated his saber and turned back toward Ezra. The boy stared in awe. "Still not interested?" Kota asked again. This time, Ezra hesitated, and then he nodded. Rahm Kota got sober. For the first time in years, he had a purpose. Ezra was not a quick learner. He was stubborn, reckless, and emotional, but Kota saw potential. Again, Kota barked, watching as Ezra struggled to block a training saber. Ezra gritted his teeth, raising his weapon only for Kota to sweep his legs out from under him. The boy hit the ground hard. "You're relying on instinct," Kota snapped. "That's good, but instinct alone won't keep you alive." Ezra groaned, rolling onto his back. "You could go easy on me." Kota chuckled. "Easy? The Empire won't go easy on you. Neither will I." Ezra got up and training continued. Kota drilled Ezra in combat relentlessly. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Ezra learned discipline. He learned to control his emotion, and when the time came, he would be ready. The mission went wrong. Ezra had been sent to steal valuable data from an Imperial transport, but he had been seen. Now, an Inquisitor was hunting him. Ezra ran through the abandoned streets of Lothal, his breath ragged, his lightsaber, a newly built one, clutched in his grip. Then, The red blade ignited behind him. The Inquisitor stalked towards him, grinning. "You've been trained," the Dark Warrior mused, "but not well enough." Ezra raised his saber, bracing himself. And then Kota arrived. "You're not touching my apprentice," Kota growled. The battle erupted. Kota attacked like a storm. His green blade clashed violently with the Inquisitor's red saber, sending sparks flying. Kota fought without hesitation, without fear. Ezra had never seen anything like it. The Inquisitor tried to counter, spinning his double-bladed weapon, but Kota was too strong. He shattered the spinning saber in half with a single strike. The Inquisitor staggered back. Kota didn't hesitate. He surged forward, plunging his saber straight through the Inquisitor's chest. The Dark Warrior gasped, then fell. Ezra stared in shock. Kota turned to him, eyes hard. "Now you see what we're up against." Ezra swallowed. He truly understood. Ezra sat by the fire, staring at the dying embers, his heart still pounding from the fight. They had barely escaped. If Kota hadn't showed up, he'd be dead. The old Jedi sat across from him, sharpening a vibroblade with slow, deliberate strokes. "You're angry," Kota said, without looking up. Ezra clenched his fists. "Of course I'm angry. The Inquisitor almost killed me." Kota chuckled. "No, he didn't. He toyed with you." He tossed the blade aside and leaned forward. "And if you ever freeze up in battle like that again, he'll kill you next time." Ezra gritted his teeth. "I was doing fine." "Fine?" Kota snapped. "You weren't doing anything. You ignited your saber and stood there, waiting for him to make the first move." He jabbed a finger at Ezra. "A real warrior seizes the fight, doesn't wait for it to come to him." Ezra scowled. "I didn't know what to do." "Exactly. And that's my failure." Ezra blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. Kota sighed, rubbing his temples. "I thought I was giving you enough training, but you're still green. That means we need to fix that." Ezra's shoulders tensed. "What do you mean?" Kota leaned back and smirked. "It means from now on, you'll wish the Inquisitor had killed you, because I'm going to make your life hell." Kota did not go easy on him. Training became relentless. Every morning, Ezra woke up sore. Kota had him running for miles across the wastelands of Lothal, pushing his body to the absolute limit. If he collapsed, he had to crawl back. Then came the drills. Hours upon hours of lightsaber combat. Kota was not like any of the Jedi Ezra had heard the legends of. He had trained commandos, soldiers, men who fought and bled in war. His teaching methods were brutal, bordering on merciless. Ezra fought through the bruises and exhaustion. If he dropped his saber, Kota would make him fight without it. If he hesitated, Kota would knock him to the ground. "Pain is a lesson," Kota growled, after slamming Ezra into the dirt for the 5th time that morning. "It teaches you not to make the same mistake twice." Ezra groaned, coughing up dust. "Get up!" Ezra pushed himself to his feet. Kota smirked. "Good. Now again." Weeks passed. Ezra's body grew stronger. His movements became sharper. His blade work faster. Most importantly, he stopped hesitating. But there was one lesson Ezra still refused to learn. One night, Ezra sat by the fire, sharpening his own knife just like Kota did. "You've gotten better," Kota admitted. Ezra smirked. "I had a good teacher." Kota raised a brow. "I'm not good. I'm necessary." Ezra's smirk faded. What does that mean? Kota sighed, staring into the flames. "The Jedi, they were too soft," he muttered. "Too sentimental. Compassion is a weakness if it clouds your judgment." He turned to Ezra, eyes hard. "If you care about someone too much, The enemy will use it against you. I've seen it happen 1,000 times before. Ezra clenched his fists. He thought of his parents, of the pain he carried with him every day. If you want to win this war, Kota continued, you need to let go of attachment. It's the first thing they will use to break you. Ezra's jaw tightened. You're wrong. Kota smirked. Maybe. He gestured to Ezra's saber. But if you let your emotions rule you in battle, you'll die before you get the chance to prove it to me. The fire crackled between them. Ezra had a lot to think about. The Empire wasn't happy about their last loss. They sent another Inquisitor. Ezra and Kota were preparing to leave their camp when a chill ran down Ezra's spine. A dark presence loomed nearby. Kota sensed it too. We're not alone. A mechanical hiss echoed from the darkness. A red blade ignited. The second sister. Ezra's grip tightened around his saber. He didn't hesitate this time. The Inquisitor lunged, her crimson blade spinning like a deadly saw. Kota moved to intercept, but Ezra was faster. He met the attack head on, blocking the strike and retaliating with his own. The second sister smirked. You've improved. Ezra said nothing. He pressed forward. Blades clashed in a storm of sparks. Ezra moved with ferocity, pushing the Inquisitor back. He was faster than before, his strikes heavier, but the second sister was experienced. She deflected one of his attacks and swept his legs out from under him. Ezra hit the ground hard. The Inquisitor loomed over him, raising her blade for the killing blow. And then Kota slammed into her like a wrecking ball. The old Jedi had hit her full force, sending her flying through the air. Before she could recover, Kota was already on top of her, his green blade a blur of light. The Inquisitor barely managed to defend herself, stumbling under the relentless assault. Kota was faster than any man his age had the right to be. He struck high, low, spinning, feinting, never letting up. The Inquisitor had no room to breathe. She made a mistake. She moved to counter too soon, and Kota's blade cut through her wrist. She screamed, stumbling back, clutching her severed stump. Her lightsaber fell to the dirt. Ezra climbed to his feet, panting. Kota pointed his blade at her chest. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them the Jedi are still alive. The Inquisitor sneered. You won't win. Kota's expression was cold. She scrambled to her feet and disappeared into the night. Ezra looked at Kota. Why did you let her go? Kota deactivated his saber. Because next time, they'll send someone stronger, and I want them to see what's coming for them. Ezra took a deep breath. The second sister had escaped, but Ezra knew this was far from over. The Empire would double their efforts now. Kota wasted no time. The training intensified. Ezra's skill with a lightsaber was growing, but Kota pushed him harder than ever. You think you're good now? Kota taunted during a sparring session. He struck faster, harder, each blow sending shudders through Ezra's arms. Good isn't enough. You need to be the best. Ezra gritted his teeth, parrying a vicious strike. I'm trying. Kota's boot slammed into his chest, knocking him flat on his back. There is no try. Ezra gasped for breath. Kota stood over him, scowling. If you think that Inquisitor was bad, you're not ready for what's coming. Ezra sat up, wiping the sweat from his brow. And what's coming? Kota stared off in the horizon, eyes cold. Vader. The name alone sent a chill down Ezra's spine. Kota knelt beside him. You want to fight for something bigger than yourself. He tapped Ezra's forehead. Then get this in order first. Strength isn't just about skill, it's about discipline. If you lose focus for even a second. He ignited his lightsaber, the green glow reflecting in his hardened eyes. You're dead. Ezra nodded, swallowing hard. He wouldn't let himself be weak again. They knew the Empire would come for them, so they struck first. Kota had spent months gathering intelligence, making contacts in the underworld. They knew an Imperial transport was scheduled to land at a secret depot on Lothal. If he could just hit it fast and hard, they could steal vital data on Imperial operations. It was supposed to be simple, but the moment they arrived, they knew something was wrong. Ezra crouched behind cover, staring at the transport bay. The cargo was there, but there was no troops guarding it. Kota cursed under his breath. It's a trap. Ezra's stomach twisted. Then we should get out of here. No, Kota said firmly. We fight. Then the shadows shifted. They heard the hum of lightsabers. Red blades ignited around them. 3 Inquisitors. The lead Inquisitor, a towering Powin with sharp angular features, smiled. Rahm Kota, it's been a long time. Kota scowled. Not long enough. The Inquisitor chuckled. We were hoping you'd come. Lord Vader has special interest in you. Ezra felt the darkness closing in. The Inquisitors moved as one, striking in perfect coordination. Ezra barely had time to block the first attack before the force of it sent him stumbling. Kota, meanwhile, moved like a storm. His green blade whirled in arcs of deadly precision, countering 2 Inquisitors at once. His footwork was impeccable, each movement controlled, each strike deadly. Ezra tried to keep up, but the 3rd Inquisitor was faster. A crimson blade slashed towards his side. He barely dodged. The Inquisitor smirked, still a child. Ezra gritted his teeth. Then Kota's voice rang out. Focus, boy! Ezra forced himself to breathe, to center himself, and then he attacked. This time, he moved with purpose. His blade met the Inquisitor's in a flurry of sparks. He didn't hesitate. The Inquisitor lunged. Ezra sidestepped and countered. Their blades locked, humming with raw power. Ezra clenched his teeth. I am no child. Then he twisted his saber, breaking the lock, and slashed across the Inquisitor's chest. The Inquisitor stumbled back, gasping. Ezra panted, heart pounding. Kota finished his own fight with a brutal flourish, decapitating the Powin Inquisitor in one clean motion. The remaining 2 saw the tide turning. They fled. Ezra stood there, panting. He had won. Kota clapped him on the shoulder. Not bad, kid. Ezra exhaled. What now? Kota looked towards the sky, his expression grim. Now, he will come. The Inquisitors had fled, but Ezra and Kota knew the fight was far from over. The moment they returned to their hideout, Kota went into full preparation mode. We don't have much time, he said, pacing. The Empire knows we're here. And if the Inquisitors failed, Ezra swallowed hard. Vader comes next. Kota nodded. And we won't survive unless we plan for it. For days they worked, setting traps, choosing the battlefield. Ezra trained harder than ever, pushing his limits under Kota's relentless instruction. But nothing could prepare them for the moment Vader arrived. It began with silence. Then the air grew heavy, suffocating. Ezra felt it before he saw him, a dark figure emerging from the fog, his presence alone sending a chill through Ezra's bones. Darth Vader. The Dark Lord moved slowly, purposefully. His cape billowed in the wind, and his black armour gleamed under Lothal's moons. He stopped a few meters away. Then he ignited his saber. The red glow bathed the battlefield in crimson light. Ezra swallowed. He's just one man. Kota tensed beside him. He's not a man. Vader's deep, mechanical breathing filled the night air. Then, with no warning, he attacked. The ground shook with the impact of Vader's first strike. Ezra barely got his saber up in time. The force of the blow sent him sliding backward. Vader pressed forward, relentless. Each of his strikes was calculating, devastating. Ezra tried to counter, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a single gust of wind. Kota moved to intercept. Their blades clashed in a flurry of sparks, green and red colliding. Kota's technique was flawless, his blade moving in precise arcs. But Vader was stronger. Kota parried. Vader caught his wrist and twisted. Kota cried out, his grip loosening. Vader kicked him in the chest, sending him crashing into a wall. Ezra saw his master fall, and something inside him snapped. With a yell, he lunged at Vader, his blue blade striking fast. But Vader barely moved. He deflected each strike effortlessly, as if Ezra were nothing more than an insect. With one brutal motion, he caught Ezra by the throat. Ezra gasped, struggling as Vader lifted him into the air. "You are weak," Vader said, his voice like thunder. "Your master has failed you." Ezra's vision blurred, his lungs burned. This was it. But then, Kota's voice rang out. "Let him go." Vader turned just in time to see Kota throw his lightsaber directly at his exposed side. Vader barely managed to deflect it, and in that instant, his grip on Ezra loosened. Ezra fell to the ground, coughing. Kota was on him in an instant. "Get up, boy!" Ezra forced himself to his feet. His chest heaved as he stood beside Kota, sweat dripping from his brow. Across from them, Darth Vader loomed, his crimson blade humming like a predator waiting to strike. Kota wiped blood from his lip, his breathing ragged. "Listen to me, kid," he muttered, gripping his saber tightly. "This fight is already lost." Ezra's hands tightened on his lightsaber. "We can't just..." Kota interrupted. "We don't fight to win. We fight to make sure they remember we fought." Vader charged. The Sith Lord moved faster than a shadow, his blade cutting through the air with lethal precision. Kota met him first. Their sabers crashed together, green and red clashing like titanic forces. Kota was a master of the blade, his Form 3 technique fluid and controlled. But Vader was relentless. A single powerful strike sent Kota stumbling backward. Vader was simply too strong. Ezra leapt in, striking low. Vader parried without effort. The Sith Lord twisted, his counterattacks nearly taking Ezra's head off. Kota pushed forward again, driving his saber at Vader's chest. Vader didn't block. He sidestepped, letting Kota's momentum carry him forward. Then, he slammed his gauntleted fist into Kota's ribs. Kota let out a strangled gasp as his body crumpled to the ground. Ezra screamed. He attacked wildly, his strikes fueled by pure rage. Vader didn't even move. Then in one single, precise motion, he disarmed Ezra. Ezra's lightsaber spun through the air, clattering on the stone. He was defenseless. Vader's hands shot out. Ezra was yanked off his feet, held in place by the Force. "You are nothing," Vader's voice boomed. Ezra clawed at his throat, struggling as his vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw Kota, dragging himself to his feet once more, his lightsaber trembling in his grasp. "Vader!" Kota roared. The Sith turned, just in time to see Kota charge one last time. Ezra saw it all happen in slow motion. Kota swung, Vader twisting to avoid the strike, and then plunged his blade straight through Kota's chest. His master let out a choked gasp. His saber slipped from his fingers. Vader ripped the blade free, and Kota collapsed to the ground, dead. Ezra screamed. A burning rage ignited inside him. He reached for the Force, trying to unleash everything he had left. Vader turned toward him. The Dark Lord extended his hand, and Ezra felt his body seize. The Force crushed him. Pain exploded in every nerve. His vision dimmed. The last thing he saw was Vader raising his lightsaber. Then, darkness. The cold wind blew across the ruins of the battlefield. Two bodies lay motionless in the dirt. Darth Vader stood over them, his blade still glowing red in the night. There was no triumph in his posture, no satisfaction, only the quiet emptiness of victory. He turned, stepping away, the hum of his lightsaber fading into the silence. The rebellion on Lothal had died here tonight, and with it, 2 warriors who had dared to stand against the darkness. What if Coleman Trevor killed Count Dooku? The Petronaki arena was chaos incarnate. What had begun as an execution turned into an all-out war. The Jedi, led by Mace Windu, had emerged in force to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala, but they had walked into a slaughter. The droid army vastly outnumbered them, and the bodies of Jedi were already littering the sands of Geonosis. Coleman Trevor, a Verk Jedi Master, stood near the edge of the fray, his sharp, reptilian eyes scanning the battlefield. The Jedi were falling. Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi fought desperately near a column of battle droids. Aayla Secura was holding her ground against advancing super battle droids, and Kit Fisto barely dodged a missile launched from a droideka. But none of it mattered. Trevor saw the true source of the disaster. Count Dooku, the leader of the Separatists, stood on a balcony overlooking the arena, coldly watching the carnage unfold. The masterminds of the Clone Wars, the man who had orchestrated this death trap. Trevor clenched his teeth. The Jedi were dying. More would fall if this continued. But if he struck Dooku down now, cut the head off the serpent, perhaps this war would end before it truly began. Decision made. He moved. Blaster bolts tore through the air as Jango Fett, the Mandalorian enforcer, fired rapidly from the sands below, covering Dooku's position. Trevor advanced, his green saber moving in a blur as he deflected the shots. His blade caught a bolt and sent it streaking back toward Fett. The bounty hunter's reflexes were sharp, but even he had to react. The reflected shot forced him to ignite his jetpack, sending him skyward to avoid the attack. In that instant, the line to Dooku was open. Trevor did not hesitate. Dooku had not expected a Jedi to reach him so quickly. He turned, raising an eyebrow in mild surprise as Trevor vaulted onto the balcony with him. The Verk Jedi wasted no time. He lunged, his saber carving a green arc toward the Count's neck. Dooku ignited his curved hilt saber, just in time to parry. The Sith Lord's aristocratic calm faltered slightly as he took a step back. He had underestimated this one. Trevor pressed the attack, his movements fluid and aggressive. He had studied Dooku's dueling style before. He knew the Count was a master of Makashi, a form built for dueling, but Makashi was precise, relying on elegant control. Trevor countered with the unpredictability of Ataru, leaping and striking from shifting angles, keeping Dooku on the defensive. The Sith Lord's frustration grew. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. "You were bold," Dooku said, his voice smooth, but edged with irritation. "But you overestimate your..." Trevor's lightsaber slipped through his guard. Dooku's eyes widened as his green blade plunged into his chest, piercing his heart. His elegant grip on his lightsaber faltered, and the weapon fell from his hand, clattering to the stone floor. Count Dooku looked truly stunned. Impossible. Then, the leader of the Separatists collapsed. Jango Fett, still airborne, turned just in time to see his employer crumble to the balcony floor, lifeless. His eyes widened behind his T-visor. Coleman Trevor stood over Dooku's corpse, breathing heavily. He had done it. He had ended the war before it could begin. But the battle was far from over. Though Count Dooku lay lifeless at the center of the arena, the Separatists had no intention of surrendering. The Republic forces surged forward, but the droids and battle-hardened soldiers of the Separatists were relentless. Even without their leader, the war continued, fueled by the twisted minds behind the scenes. Coleman Trevor moved like a force of nature, his lightsaber an extension of his fury. He cut through the endless ranks of battle droids, his powerful strikes flashing in the smoky air. But despite the victory over Dooku, he couldn't shake the weight of the reality pressing down on him. The Jedi were dying around him. His brothers and sisters who had fought alongside him were falling, their lightsabers extinguished in the chaos. "Stay focused," Obi-Wan shouted, his voice cutting through the din. He parried a blaster shot before redirecting it into the chest of a droid, dispatching it with expert precision. Trevor's heart raced. He had struck down Dooku. He had dealt a blow to the Separatists' leadership, but the battle was still in full force, and the cost of victory was too high. The cries of his fallen comrades echoed in his mind. Was this the price of peace? Yet there was no time for second guessing. "Keep pushing," Trevor called, rallying the remaining Jedi. He dashed forward, meeting an oncoming wave of droids head on. His movements were fluid, calculated, his blade dancing through the air, deflecting blaster bolts and cutting down the mechanical soldiers with surgical precision. Trevor couldn't let the loss of his fellow Jedi dissuade him. He had already crossed the line by killing Dooku. There was no turning back now. As the battle intensified, Trevor's intuition sharpened. He could feel the shifting tides of the war, the growing uncertainty that gnawed at the edges of victory. The Jedi had won here, but the galaxy still teetered on the brink of destruction. He needed to act. He needed to finish this. His gaze locked on a new, familiar threat, Jango Fett. The bounty hunter had been relentless in his pursuit of the Jedi, and now he was among the survivors, leading a group of battle droids with deadly intent. Trevor didn't hesitate. He darted forward, closing the gap between himself and the bounty hunter. Blaster bolts flew at him, but Trevor was quicker. His lightsaber flashed in a blur, deflecting every shot backward toward Jango. The bolts flew like lightning, each one redirected with impeccable precision. Jango's reaction was swift. He activated his jetpack and soared into the air, narrowly avoiding the deadly barrage. But Trevor was not finished. With a fierce roar, he leapt into the air after Jango, his lightsaber trailing behind him in a streak of light. The bounty hunter's head snapped around in surprise. "You're out of your league, Jedi," Jango snarled, pulling a blaster from his side as he ascended higher. Trevor, undeterred, used the force to propel himself higher. He was on Jango's tail in an instant, his every movement fueled by the battle's urgency. With a swift, decisive strike, Trevor slashed through the jetpack, sending Jango plummeting to the ground with a harsh thud. The bounty hunter was stunned, unable to react fast enough as Trevor landed before him, his lightsaber poised for the final strike. Jango attempted to draw a weapon, but Trevor was too fast. With one swift movement, he sliced through the bounty hunter's weapon and then his torso, bringing the reign of one of the galaxy's most feared mercenaries to a brutal end. The remaining droids hesitated for a moment, thrown into disarray without their leader. Trevor didn't hesitate. He charged forward, cutting through them like a blade through paper, clearing a path for Republic forces to press on. Victory was in their grasp, but Trevor's heart remained unsettled. Even with Jango's death and the droid's retreat, the war had not ended yet. There was still so much left to do. As the last of the droids were defeated, the arena fell silent. The cries of battle subsided, leaving behind the faint hum of lightsabers and the distant wail of approaching Republic gunships. Trevor stood at the center of it all, his chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion. "Master Windu," Trevor called, catching Mace's attention. "What's our next move?" Mace looked at him, his expression unreadable. "We push forward. The war is not over. Dooku's death is but a single piece in a much larger puzzle. We must prepare for what comes next." Trevor's thoughts were filled with doubt. He had struck down Dooku, a Sith Lord, but had he truly stopped the tide of darkness? Or had he simply fueled it? The fate of the galaxy seemed less certain now than ever. "We are victorious, but the Sith have always had a way of slipping through the cracks," Obi-Wan said, his voice heavy with the burden of truth. "We cannot afford to underestimate them." Trevor nodded, his mind never fully at ease. "The war continues then. We'll fight. We have no other choice." But deep within, he knew that the future was uncertain, and the true test was just beginning. Months passed since the Battle of Geonosis, and the galaxy was thrust deeper into the chaos of war. The Republic's forces fought valiantly, but the death of Dooku had done little to stem the Separatist war machine. If anything, it had made the struggle more brutal. The Separatists, now under the command of General Grievous, were a force of terrifying power and calculation. It was on the planet of Utapau that Coleman Trebor found himself face to face with this new nightmare. The towering figure of General Grievous loomed before him, 4 metallic arms extended outward, each wielding a lightsaber. His mechanical limbs hissed and whirred as he prepared for combat. The cyborg warlord had a reputation, one that preceded him in every corner of the galaxy. His ruthless efficiency in battle, combined with his fearsome ability to wield multiple blades simultaneously, had made him a legend among the Separatists. Trebor stood his ground, his own lightsaber humming in his hand. He had fought countless battles, faced Dooku, survived Geonosis, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Grievous's hollow, raspy voice echoed through the chamber. "Jedi, I've been waiting for this." Before Trebor could react, Grievous struck. His 4 lightsabers slashed through the air with unimaginable speed, forcing Trebor to immediately go on the defensive. Grievous was like a storm, fast, unpredictable, and brutal. Trebor's blade met his, deflecting with all his strength, but the cyborg's attack was relentless. The sheer force of each strike rattled Trebor's body, pushing him back, making him feel small, insignificant. With a single horrifying move, Grievous spun in the air, his lightsabers flashing in every direction. Trebor blocked one, but another came at him from an unexpected angle, slicing through the fabric of his tunic and grazing his side. The pain was sharp, but it wasn't enough to stop him. He danced around the attack, forcing himself to focus, but Grievous's relentless assault seemed to grow stronger with every moment. The cyborg's speed was incredible, his movements a blur, his 4 arms combining in a seamless dance of destruction. Every time Trebor thought he had gained the upper hand, Grievous adapted, countering his strikes with surgical precision. It was a nightmare made real. Trebor had faced powerful foes before, but Grievous was something else entirely. His mechanical body was an extension of his will, and that will was to kill. Coleman Trebor's vision blurred with fatigue, his every muscle screaming for rest. His blade began to slow. Grievous noticed it, and with a brutal twist, his saber connected with Trebor's, sending it spinning from his hand. Before Trebor could react, Grievous grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground with ease. "You're weaker than I thought, Jedi," Grievous sneered. "Your order is full of disappointments." Trebor could barely breathe, his body fighting to stay conscious. The force pulsed inside him, but it was fading. His survival instinct flared. He gathered every last ounce of strength and focused. His hand stretched out, and with a surge of the force, he pushed Grievous back. The cyborg warlord staggered, losing his grip on Trebor for a brief moment. Trebor stumbled to his feet, his breath ragged, blood seeping from his wounds. He could feel the presence of the dark side swirling within him, its pull growing stronger with each passing moment. But there was no time to consider it. Trebor grabbed his lightsaber and launched himself at Grievous, his attacks wild and fueled by desperation. In a final, furious clash, Trebor fought with everything he had, using his skill and the force to push through the pain, the fatigue. He struck with precision, forcing Grievous to parry with his multiple sabers. In a split second of weakness, Trebor took the opening, slashing at Grievous's exposed side. Grievous let out a mechanical scream, his systems faltering. Trebor seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful kick to Grievous's chest, sending the warlord crashing backward. His limbs twitched, sparking as they lost power. Trebor was exhausted, his energy drained, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He looked at the broken form of General Grievous, his body sparking and malfunctioning. This was not the end. Trebor knew it, but it was only a temporary victory. The war raged on. With Grievous's defeat, the Separatists only grew more desperate, throwing everything they had at the Republic. But as the Jedi fought to protect the galaxy, Coleman Trevor could feel a change within himself. The darkness that had been whispering in the back of his mind now seemed impossible to ignore. The anger, the rage, the frustration, it all built up with every battle, with every loss. He had seen his brothers and sisters in the Order fall, their lightsabers extinguished one by one, their lives snuffed out in the name of a war that seemed to have no end. It wasn't just the Sith he feared now, it was the very war itself. The Jedi had become soldiers, bound to a never-ending conflict, locked into a cycle of bloodshed that seemed to have no escape. Trevor had always been a warrior, but now his purpose was coming into question. He sat in meditation, his legs crossed and eyes closed, but the peace he once found in the Force was slipping away. Images of the battlefield, of Dooku's death, of Grievous's attack, of fallen Jedi flashed before his mind's eye. The dark side seemed to reach out to him, offering power, offering an end to the pain. Was this what it meant to be a Jedi? Was this what he had signed up for? To be nothing more than a weapon? Another tool in a war that never ended? His fingers trembled as he reached for the lightsaber at his side. The steady hum of his blade used to be a source of comfort, a reminder of delight. Now it felt like a weight, a burden, something that kept him chained to the cycle of violence and endless fighting. The dark side was not just an external threat, it was becoming part of him. The final straw came during the Battle of Coruscant. As the Republic was pushed to the brink, Trevor found himself standing in the midst of yet another fight. Lightsaber in hand, surrounded by his fellow Jedi. But something had changed. The enemy no longer felt like the true threat. The Jedi Order itself. The endless war. The unwavering loyalty to a Republic that used them as pawns began to feel like the true enemy. He had always followed the Jedi Code, always believed in their mission, but now it seemed so hollow. The Jedi had become soldiers, just like everyone else. The ideals of peace and justice felt more like a far-off dream, something that couldn't survive in the ashes of war. As Trevor fought on, his strikes becoming more brutal, he could feel the anger inside of him bubbling to the surface. His lightsaber clashed violently with the enemy, and the pull of the dark side threatened to overtake him. He was too strong, too close to the edge. He couldn't do it anymore. After the battle was won, Trevor retreated. He no longer sought the comfort of his fellow Jedi, he sought solitude. Coleman Trevor left the Jedi Order, walking away from everything he had known. The war had taken too much from him. The Order, once a beacon of light and hope, had become just another faction in a galaxy torn apart by conflict. He spent his days in meditation, seeking peace within himself. The darkness still lingered, but he was determined to find his own way, one not dictated by the Sith, the Jedi, or the Republic. He would not fight anymore. He would live out his days in silence, far removed from the violence of the galaxy. The path of the Jedi was no longer his. The Force, however, would always be a part of him. But Trevor would seek to find peace, not through battle, but through understanding. And so, Coleman Trevor faded into the shadows of history, a Jedi who walked away from the war, seeking solace and redemption in a galaxy that had long since forgotten the meaning of peace. Drop the scenarios you would like to see in the comments, and I will pick one every week for Fan Friday. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in the next one.